The late 1970s were the last great roar of American farming. Diesel engines thundered across endless acres. America was feeding the world. An International Harvester was the muscle behind it all. But whilst diesel engines are still dominant across American farms, those same factories sit silent. The empire that fed America. The saga of International Harvester stretches back to 1831, marking a pivotal moment in American history when Cyrus McCormick unveiled his revolutionary mechanical reaper. This wasn't merely a machine to cut grain. It fundamentally altered the rhythm of rural life, dramatically reducing the manual labor required for harvesting. This early foundational innovation forged an enduring bond between farming families and McCormick's machinery. It was a trust based on carrying their hopes, securing their harvests, and ensuring their economic survival. Leveraging this immense customer loyalty, they officially formed in the early 20th century through a strategic merger and quickly ascended to become the largest farm equipment manufacturer on the globe. The company's colossal output spanned a massive product portfolio, encompassing not just tractors and combines, but also engines, construction equipment, and a wide array of commercial trucks. To feed this sprawling industrial empire, they established a vast network of manufacturing facilities across the American Midwest, concentrating in states like Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Ohio, employing tens of thousands of workers in dynamic, interconnected industrial communities. The company's stature was further cemented during World War II, when it secured major military and government contracts, building essential engines, trucks, and specialized crawlers for the United States war effort. These contributions transcended mere commerce. They solidified the company's status as an indispensable national pillar. Yet, even at its peak, the seeds of the company's eventual downfall were already being sown. Management missteps began to accumulate, and the organization became plagued by escalating labor battles. Furthermore, the company engaged in high-stakes engineering gambles, some that led to brilliant innovations, and others that failed spectacularly, straining resources. The spectacular rise of International Harvester was built on decades of human ingenuity and strategic decisions, and tragically, its rapid, dramatic fall was equally rooted in human error and miscalculation, creating one of America's great industrial tragedies. How International Harvester became untouchable. International Harvester's dominance didn't happen overnight. It was the result of decades of innovation in farm machinery. After the 1902 merger of McCormick, Deering, and other companies, they quickly became a giant in the agricultural equipment industry. The merger was brokered by J.P. Morgan to end the intense harvester wars and the damaging price competition that characterized the industry in the late 19th century. The newly formed International Harvester Company immediately controlled around 85% of the United States harvesting equipment market. By 1908, the company was making about 700,000 harvesters worldwide and employing tens of thousands of workers domestically and through its agency network. One of the company's biggest breakthroughs came in 1924 with the Farmall tractor. This lightweight, general-purpose row crop machine could cultivate, haul, and plant, representing a major efficiency leap compared to earlier bulky tractors. By 1930, they had built its 100,000th Farmall, and later models like the Farmall F20 and A became staples on American farms, with production figures in the tens of thousands for individual models. These machines reshaped agricultural efficiency, cutting labor and time while enabling larger acreage and consistent crop yields. Success in the agricultural fields allowed them to expand. So it did, from the crop fields to the battlefield. World War II further accelerated International Harvester's rise. The company ranked 33rd among United States corporations in World War II production contracts, building tractors, trucks, artillery components, and other military gear. The wartime boom fortified their factory footprint across states and helped diversify its output beyond agriculture. But that success bred overconfidence. Massive wartime investment and government success encouraged them to prioritize quantity over quality, which would eventually cause it to lose direction. Government contracts. By the late 1930s and throughout World War II, International Harvester had become a critical military supplier. The United States government awarded International Harvester massive contracts to produce trucks, engines, naval equipment, artillery tractors, and even specialized military versions of its farm machines. At its peak wartime output, they ran 24-hour shifts and produced over 500,000 military trucks, becoming one of the Pentagon's most relied upon manufacturers. These contracts poured unprecedented money into the company. Government orders accounted for more than one-third of the company's total production during World War II, as per an annual report by 1946. But this success came with a hidden cost. Flush with wartime cash and prestige, International Harvester's leadership convinced itself that Washington would remain a permanent client. The company expanded its military manufacturing footprint, built new facilities, and staffed divisions far beyond what peacetime demand could support. This is where the greed angle appears. They overbuilt its military division, assuming the Pentagon's checkbook would never close. When the war ended and Korea wound down, defense spending cooled sharply. Pentagon orders dropped, leaving International Harvester with a massive, underutilized industrial base that could not be profitably sustained. Factories that once ran at wartime intensity now sat half idle, and overhead costs ballooned. The company had become dependent on government subsidies, and suddenly their internal problems were exposed: the arrogance of success. After World War II, International Harvester stood as an industrial titan. Factories were humming, wartime contracts had filled the coffers, and the company seemed untouchable. But this confidence slowly hardened into arrogance rooted in the McCormick family. Boardroom decisions were heavily influenced by family ego, internal rivalries, and battles for authority. Proposals for factory modernization, engineering upgrades, and new tractor designs were repeatedly delayed or blocked if they threatened McCormick's vision or prestige. This dynastic influence turned overconfidence into institutional inertia, where pride outweighed practical necessity. Meanwhile, executives believed that history itself guaranteed International Harvester's dominance. The company was too big to fail, and leadership dismissed early warnings from engineers, environmental shifts, and foreign competitors. Japanese and European manufacturers experimenting with fuel-efficient, reliable machinery were laughed off as irrelevant, reinforcing a mindset that the International Harvester brand alone could sustain customer loyalty. The combination of family-driven politics, boardroom ego, and post-war overconfidence created the perfect storm. Innovation was stifled. Aging platforms were pushed to market year after year, and critical investments in research and development were deferred. The seeds of future decline were sown not by external forces, but by the very people entrusted to safeguard the company's legacy. Pride, dynastic control, and an unwillingness to adapt would guide the company toward the crises that eventually consumed it. That post-war arrogance became the slow poison, the farm crisis that made everything worse. International Harvester didn't collapse in a vacuum. Yes, the company made mistakes, but the late 70s and early 80s brought a perfect storm, and it hit their customers first: American farmers. Farmers entered the 1980s facing insurmountable financial headwinds. Following an era of cheap credit and expansion, interest rates soared, climbing to a punishing 18% and higher. This surge made essential loans for land acquisition, equipment upgrades, and operating capital prohibitively expensive, effectively grinding farm expansion to a halt and dramatically increasing the cost of existing debt. Simultaneously, global oil shocks drove fuel costs to rise, inflating the operational expenses of running tractors, combines, and vital irrigation systems. The crisis was compounded on the revenue side. As input costs rose, commodity prices plummeted, leaving farmers with harvests that fetched far less than anticipated. The price-cost squeeze eroded profit margins entirely, driving debt levels dangerously high and making loan defaults common. This desperate economic backdrop is crucial to understanding the full tragedy of International Harvester. Farmers, the very backbone of the company's customer base, were themselves drowning in financial stress. When they struggled with crippling labor strikes, the delivery of outdated machinery, and severe supply chain breakdowns, it wasn't just an internal corporate failure. It amplified the pain of an already vulnerable agricultural sector. A delayed or non-functional International Harvester combine, once a minor inconvenience, now threatens the economic survival of a farmer struggling to make a payment. Customers defected not out of disloyalty, but out of necessity. The company was not operating in a vacuum, and its internal failures cannot be entirely separated from the economic turmoil of the farming community it served. The intertwined fates of indebted farmers and the mismanaged equipment giant make the story of International Harvester's decline both more complex and more poignant, powerfully illustrating how a macroeconomic crisis can magnify the fatal consequences of corporate error. Brutal competition and the response. The breaking point arrived in late 1979, when International Harvester stumbled into the longest and most destructive strike in its history. These were 172 days of halted production, empty factories, and families scraping by with no paychecks. Workers demanded fair wages, humane hours, and respect. The company leadership refused. They insisted on wage cuts and tighter schedules, claiming the company was bleeding financially. Yet executive bonuses continued flowing upward, fueling anger on the factory floors. This was all thanks to Archie McCardle, CEO from 1977 to 1982. McCardle pushed aggressively for wage and benefit cuts, sparking the 172-day 1979 strike, the longest in the company's history. The trade-off was simple. International Harvester could treat its workforce fairly and preserve loyalty, or it could squeeze them for savings. They chose the squeeze, and it backfired catastrophically. With plants shut down, the company lost an estimated $100 to $150 million per month in stalled production and evaporating orders. Farmers who had bought International Harvester for generations couldn't get parts or service. A company already weakened by years of slow innovation suddenly faced a crisis entirely of its own making. When the strike finally ended, the company was still standing, but the world around it had moved on. John Deere had leapt ahead with modern tractors, cleaner engines, and financing programs that made upgrading easier. Case and Massey Ferguson were rolling out more efficient systems every year. Japanese manufacturers like Kubota pushed into the market with machines that were smaller, cheaper, and far more fuel efficient. Meanwhile, International Harvester stayed locked to aging tractor platforms and outdated engines because redesigning them would be expensive. They tried to catch up with the late arriving 50 Series tractors, but by then, the market had already decided their fate. But there was still energy left in the tank, and a fire was ignited thanks to the government contracts International Harvester received. Mountain of debt. Entering the early 1980s, the company was financially suffocating. The company had steadily lost operational efficiency, seen its once dominant market share erode, and perhaps most critically, forfeited the hard-won trust of its customers and suppliers. Instead of undergoing the painful but necessary restructuring, the company's leadership turned to massive borrowing as a desperate lifeline. Loans became their oxygen, providing temporary relief but condemning the long-term survival of the organization. Every new credit line bought a few more months of payroll, financed a little more inventory, and temporarily delayed outstanding obligations. However, every loan also relentlessly deepened International Harvester's financial hole, turning manageable operational losses into a towering, insurmountable wall of debt. As the cost of servicing this debt skyrocketed and cash reserves evaporated, the consequences became starkly visible on the ground. Factories began shutting down across the Midwest, and massive layoffs rippled through communities that had depended on the company for generations. Entire neighborhoods in industrial hubs like Chicago, Rock Island, Louisville, and Fort Wayne saw immediate economic decline as tens of thousands of skilled workers suddenly found themselves without stable employment. On the customer side, the damage was equally devastating. Farmers who had trusted the International Harvester Red brand for decades now faced long delays in equipment deliveries, months-long back orders for essential parts, and minimal customer support. The uncertainty surrounding the company's future made a long-term commitment an untenable risk. Many simply defected to competitors like John Deere or Case, not necessarily out of preference, but out of absolute necessity and survival. By 1984, the sheer weight of debt, coupled with years of financial mismanagement and collapsing operations, made escape impossible. The company was forced into a painful breakup. Its core agricultural division, the iconic maker of farm-all tractors and legendary machinery, was absorbed by Tenneco's Case, effectively ending the century-old identity of a company that had once singularly ruled American farming, the sale to Tenneco. By 1984, the weight of decades of mismanagement, strikes, debt, and outdated machinery had finally crushed International Harvester. The board of directors, once so confident in the company's untouchable legacy, admitted what employees had feared for years. International Harvester could no longer survive as an independent agricultural giant. In a move that shocked the farming world, the company sold its agricultural division to Tenneco, the owner of Case. creating a new company in the process, Case International Harvester. The transaction was more than a business deal. It was an industrial funeral. Factories that had hummed with the pride of generations went silent. Towns that had identified themselves by their International Harvester plants and red tractors suddenly lost part of their soul. Families who had worked the same line for decades found their heritage erased overnight. The iconic red tractors that had once symbolized American innovation and rural resilience now carried a different logo, a new corporate identity built on the bones of the company. Workers felt a deep betrayal. Generational knowledge of assembly, maintenance, and engineering was suddenly severed from the brand that had nurtured it. Dealers who had been International Harvester loyalists for decades now had to reorient themselves, sell machines under a new banner, and convince customers that change didn't mean abandoning the legacy they loved. The symbolic weight of this transition was immense. America's once greatest farming empire, a company that had mechanized the nation, fueled its wars, and defined the rhythm of rural life, was gone. Not through market forces alone, but because corporate greed, overconfidence, and neglect had undermined its foundations. The sale to Tenneco did not merely change a logo, it marked the end of an era, the ghost of a lost empire. Walk through the Midwest today, and you can still see the echoes of International Harvester. Empty factories stand as silent witnesses, rusting steel skeletons of assembly lines that once roared with life. Some have been repurposed into warehouses or retail spaces. Others were leveled entirely, leaving only concrete pads in memory. Yet for those who grew up with International Harvester, nothing can replace the hum of machinery, the smell of oil and acetone, or the pride of a line worker watching a Farmel or Cub Cadet roll off the floor for the first time. In barns and backyards across the country, farmers meticulously restore old International Harvester tractors, polishing faded red paint, tightening nuts and bolts, and firing up engines that predate their own birth. Each turn of the key is a tribute, a conversation across generations. These machines are more than tools. They are heirlooms, embodying decades of labor, ingenuity, and hope. Nostalgia runs deep because it was an entire era of American farming, and it was tied to the company's machines. The loss of International Harvester reshaped the landscape of farming forever. Small towns that once thrived on their production dwindled. Dealerships consolidated. Farms now purchase from global conglomerates, and the intimate bond between manufacturer, machinery, and farmer has been diluted. It is a reminder that industry consolidation comes at a human cost, one that cannot be fully measured in dollars or units sold. And yet, the lessons of International Harvester have never been fully learned. Across modern corporations, overconfidence, short-term profit pressures, and the neglect of innovation continue to repeat the same patterns that doomed that same company. It is a cautionary tale, one told not in spreadsheets, but in the silence of empty factories, the gleam of restored tractors, and the collective memory of a generation that lost something irreplaceable. As the sun sets over these remnants of red-painted pride, we are left with more than nostalgia. We are left with a story of ambition and hubris, of ingenuity and oversight, of a lost empire whose ghost still whispers across the fields it once helped to harvest. International Harvester was never just a company. It was a culture, a community, a heartbeat of rural America. It embodied pride, ingenuity, and the promise that hard work and innovation could build a better life. In towns across the Midwest, International Harvester factories weren't merely workplaces. Instead, they were landmarks, gathering places, symbols that generations could measure their lives against. Today, much of that world has vanished. Empty factories, silent assembly lines, and rusting equipment stand as ghostly reminders of a lost era. Yet for some, the memory is alive. Farmers meticulously keep old International Harvester tractors running, polishing the faded red paint and coaxing the engines back to life. For them, these machines are more than tools. They are heirlooms. One misstep does not topple an empire, but decades of prioritizing profit over people, innovation, and responsibility always will. Ignoring innovation invites competition to overtake you. Mistreating your workforce accelerates collapse. Over-reliance on government contracts creates a false sense of security, and blind leadership driven by greed seals the fate of even the mightiest enterprise. International Harvester didn't collapse because America failed. It collapsed because the people in charge forgot who they were building for. They lost sight of farmers, workers, and communities. And in that loss, an empire that had once defined the rhythm of American agriculture became a ghost.